The cold was a physical thing, a thief that stole the breath from Ilara's lungs and the feeling from her fingertips. It seeped through the worn seams of her coat, a coat that had seen too many winters and offered too little defense against this one. Each gust of wind that funneled down the city street felt personal, an icy slap across her already weary face. Christmas lights twinkled with cruel cheerfulness from shop windows, casting long golden shadows on the slush-covered pavement. They glittered on snowflakes that caught in her dark curls, melting into damp traces of cold against her skin. For everyone else, it seemed, this was a season of warmth and magic. For Ilara, it was a season of sharp, biting survival. Her son, Leo, was the single point of warmth in her universe. At 6 years old, he still possessed a belief in magic that she fought fiercely to protect, even as her own had long since crumbled into dust. He didn't see the peeling paint in their tiny apartment or notice that their dinners were often simple variations of the same inexpensive ingredients. He saw a world of adventure, of heroes and starships, a universe painted in the brilliant colors of his imagination. And at the very center of that universe right now was a toy, the Stardust Comet, a sleek silver starship from his favorite cartoon. It was his only Christmas wish, whispered to her at night with the solemn gravity only a child could muster. In her pocket, her gloved fingers were wrapped around a single crisp $10 bill. It was the last of her cash, the final remnant of her last paycheck after the rent, the utilities, and the groceries had taken their voracious shares. The Stardust Comet cost exactly $9.99. It felt like a sign, a small, fragile piece of hope. This $10 bill was the difference between a child's magical Christmas morning and the quiet, heartbreaking disappointment she could not bear to witness. It was her entire plan, the thin thread from which her son's happiness hung. She walked past storefronts displaying lavish feasts and expensive electronics, her gaze distant. The city was a cacophony of cheerful noise, the chime of Salvation Army bells, the murmur of shoppers laden with bags, the distant sound of carols playing from a loudspeaker. To Ilara, it was all muted, a world seen through a thick pane of glass. Her focus was narrowed to a single objective, the toy store 3 blocks away. Her steps were hurried not just to escape the cold, but to outrun the gnawing anxiety that was her constant companion. The weight of being a single mother, a kindergarten teacher on a meager salary, was a physical pressure on her chest, a constant, dull ache of worry. She thought of her classroom, a small, vibrant pocket of warmth and color in an underfunded public school. It was her sanctuary as much as it was for the children. There, she was not just a woman struggling to make ends meet. She was Miss Ilara, the creator of worlds from construction paper and glue, the keeper of stories, the healer of scraped knees and small heartaches. She poured every ounce of her energy and love into those 20 little souls, hoping to give them the bright start they all deserved. It was a fulfilling job, a calling even, but it was a calling that did not pay the bills with the ease the world seemed to demand. As she turned a corner, a different kind of store caught her eye. It wasn't filled with toys or festive decorations. It was an art supply shop, its window displaying neat rows of colored pencils, thick pads of textured paper, and tubes of brilliant paint. Normally, she would have walked past without a second glance, but today she paused. Her mind, unbidden, conjured the image of a small, quiet face from her classroom. A little girl named Maya. Maya was a ghost in the vibrant ecosystem of her kindergarten class, while other children shouted and laughed and built teetering towers of blocks. Maya existed in the margins. She was a silent observer with eyes that seemed to hold a sorrow far too deep for her 6 years. She rarely spoke, and never about herself or her home life. Her emergency contact form was thin, listing only a mother with a temporary address. Alara's heart ached for the girl, for the invisible burden she seemed to carry on her small shoulders. The only time Maya ever seemed to come alive was when she had a piece of paper and a crayon in her hand. She would draw with an intensity and skill that was startling in a child so young. She didn't draw the typical houses with smiling suns or stick-figure families. She drew intricate, swirling galaxies, lonely castles on jagged cliffs, and animals with sad, knowing eyes. Her drawings were windows into a world of profound beauty and loneliness. But the tools she had were the standard-issue school supplies, worn-down crayons with peeled paper and thin, flimsy paper that buckled under the slightest pressure. Just yesterday, Alara had watched as Maya tried to blend a sunset sky with a nub of an orange crayon and a broken piece of red. The frustration on the little girl's face was a tiny, sharp tragedy. Alara had felt a powerful, protective urge, a desire to give this child the tools she needed to let her silent, beautiful world pour out in its full color. She had imagined a proper set of art supplies in Maya's hands, a thick sketchbook with paper that could hold the depth of her imagination. It was a fleeting thought, a teacher's wish, filed away with all the other things she wished she could provide but couldn't afford. Now, standing in the cold, staring into the art store window, the wish returned with an unexpected force. A display near the front featured a beautiful wooden box of 72 colored pencils, their sharpened points arranged in a perfect rainbow spectrum. Beside it was a stack of heavy-gauge drawing pads. Alara's eyes fell on a smaller, more modest set, a simple tin of 24 high-quality artist's pencils and a single good-quality sketch pad. A small price tag was visible. $10. Exactly. The air seemed to leave her body. The $10 bill in her pocket, the one designated for Leo's stardust comet, suddenly felt heavy, a weight of decision she was not prepared for. Her mind raced, a frantic battlefield of competing duties. There was her promise to Leo, his trusting eyes and his whispered Christmas wish, the image of his face on Christmas morning, alight with joy as he unwrapped his beloved starship, was a vision she had clung to for weeks. It was the one perfect thing she felt she could give him in a life that was so often imperfect. But then there was Maya, the silent, sad little girl who spoke through her art. What was a toy, a piece of plastic, compared to giving a child a voice? What if a simple set of pencils could unlock something in her, could offer her a way to process the silent sadness that clung to her like a shroud? It wasn't just about art, it was about connection, about showing a lonely child that someone saw her, that she mattered. The wind howled, pushing her, and she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. It was the tremor of a heart torn in two. She was a mother first. Her duty was to her son. She had already pictured his hands holding the toy, had already heard his happy shouts as he made it fly through the air in their small living room. To take that away from him felt like a betrayal, a failure of her most fundamental role. He was her child. He deserved that moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Yet her students were her children too, in a way. She was responsible for their well-being, for nurturing their minds and spirits during the precious hours they were in her care. She saw the flicker of genius in Maya, the fragile spark of a gift that needed to be fanned, not left to die out from lack of fuel. To ignore that, to walk away when the means to help was literally in her hand, felt like a different kind of failure. It was a failure of her calling, a betrayal of the very reason she became a teacher. The internal debate was a storm inside her. She could put Leo's toy on her credit card. The thought was a familiar, sickening lurch in her stomach. The card was nearly maxed out, a monument to a dozen small emergencies and the simple, grinding cost of living. There was no guarantee the charge would even go through. If it was declined, she would have nothing for Leo, nothing at all. Using the cash was the only sure way. It was the safe choice, the mother's choice. She closed her eyes, the festive lights of the street imprinting bright spots on the inside of her eyelids. She pictured Leo's face, then Maya's. Leo's face was full of hope and expectation, the innocent certainty that his mother could make magic happen. Maya's face was full of a quiet resignation, an expectation of nothing. And in that stark contrast, the decision made itself. It settled not in her mind, but in her soul, with a sense of quiet, painful clarity. Hope was a sturdy plant. It could survive a little disappointment. Resignation, however, was a barren soil where nothing new could grow. She had to plant a seed for Maya. Taking a deep, cold breath, Ilara pushed open the door to the art supply store. A small bell chimed overhead, a sound that seemed to seal her choice. The air inside was warm and smelled of paper and wood and turpentine, a clean, creative scent that was a world away from the slushy street. She walked directly to the display, her movements swift and certain, as if afraid she might change her mind. She picked up the tin of colored pencils and the single sketch pad. The $10 price tag seemed to stare up at her, an accusation and a confirmation all at once. At the counter, she handed the items and the $10 bill to the cashier. The transaction was quick, impersonal. As the cashier handed her the small paper bag, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a profound sense of loss, the ghost of Leo's joyful face fading from her mind's eye. But underneath it, there was a deeper feeling, a solid, unwavering sense of rightness. It was a strange kind of peace, the kind that comes from choosing the harder path, because you know it is the true one. She had made a sacrifice, and it hurt, but it also felt strangely liberating, as if she had unburdened herself of a weight she didn't know she was carrying. She left the store and walked the few blocks to the school. The building was dark and empty, the children and teachers long gone for the day. She let herself in with her key, the familiar silence of the empty hallways wrapping around her. She walked to her classroom, the little bag clutched in her hand. The room was filled with the cheerful chaos of kindergarten, a testament to a day of learning and play. Tiny chairs were askew, and a faint scent of graham crackers and finger paint hung in the air. She went to Maya's small desk, tucked away in a quiet corner as the girl preferred. She carefully placed the new sketch pad and the tin of pencils on the little wooden surface. She didn't leave a note. She wanted it to be a gift from the universe, a small, unexplained miracle. She imagined Maya's face in the morning when she found it, the flicker of surprise, maybe even a tiny, rare smile. That image would have to be her reward. It would have to be enough. Leaving the school, the cold seemed even more intense. The peace she had felt was beginning to fray at the edges, replaced by the returning practical anxiety. The problem of Leo's gift remained. She had to try the credit card. It was her only option now. She squared her shoulders and began the walk to the toy store, her heart a heavy, uncertain drum in her chest. The toy store was an assault on the senses. Bright fluorescent lights glared down on aisles packed with toys of every conceivable shape and color. The air was thick with the scent of plastic and cardboard, and the noise was a constant high-pitched din of excited children and frazzled parents. Ilara felt out of place in her worn coat, a gray figure in a world of explosive color. She navigated the crowded aisles, her eyes scanning for the familiar box. She found it in the Galactic Adventures section. The Stardust Comet sat on the shelf, its silver plastic gleaming under the store lights. It was just as Leo had described it, with sleek fins and a bold red logo. She picked up the box, its weight feeling both trivial and immense in her hands. She held her son's entire Christmas in a cardboard box. The thought made her feel dizzy. The line for the checkout snaked halfway down the main aisle. Ilara joined the queue, her anxiety growing with every passing minute. She rehearsed the moment in her head, The cashier scanning the item, her handing over the card, the machine either accepting or rejecting it. She felt a flush of preemptive shame at the thought of it being declined, of having to hand the toy back, of walking out empty-handed. She clutched the box to her chest like a shield. Finally, it was her turn. She placed the Stardust Comet on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "That will be $9.99, the young cashier said, his voice bored and tired. Ilara pulled the credit card from her wallet. It looked worn, the numbers faded. She slid it into the chip reader, her breath held tight in her lungs. The machine whirred for a moment, and then a harsh, digital beep cut through the store's noise. The small screen flashed a single, brutal word: declined. Heat flooded Ilara's face. It was a wave of pure, undiluted humiliation. "I'm sorry," the cashier said, not looking at her. "It didn't go through. Do you have another form of payment?" She could only shake her head, the words caught in her throat. She stared at the toy on the counter, the symbol of her failure. All she could think about was Leo's face, the inevitable question on Christmas morning. The shame was so intense it felt like a physical blow knocking the air from her lungs. "Excuse me." The voice was deep and calm, coming from somewhere behind her. "Let me get that." Ilara turned, her vision blurred with unshed tears. A man was standing there. He was tall and impeccably dressed, in a dark wool overcoat that spoke of quiet expense. He had a kind, handsome face, but his eyes held a profound sadness, a familiar sort of weariness that she recognized in her own reflection. He was already handing a sleek black credit card to the cashier. "Oh no, please," Ilara stammered, finding her voice. "You don't have to do that. I can't let you." He gave her a small, sad smile. "It's Christmas," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "Please, allow me." His voice was gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. The cashier ran his card, and this time the machine beeped its approval instantly. The transaction was complete. The cashier placed the toy in a brightly colored plastic bag and handed it to Ilara. She took it, her fingers numb. She turned back to the man, the stranger who had just answered a prayer she hadn't even dared to voice. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. I don't know what to say. How can I repay you?" He shook his head. "There's no need. Truly." He looked at the toy in her hand, and for a moment the sadness in his eyes seemed to deepen. Someone's going to be very happy on Christmas morning. His gaze met hers, and she saw a flicker of something, a shared understanding of the burdens of parenthood, perhaps. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, and then, with a polite nod, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers before she could say another word. Ilara stood frozen for a moment, clutching the bag, a stranger's impossible kindness resting in her hands. Julian Vance walked out of the toy store and into the biting December wind. The brief act of charity had done little to warm the perpetual winter in his own soul. He moved through the festive crowds like a phantom, his wealth and success a heavy coat that insulated him from the world but offered no real warmth. He saw the happy families, the parents holding their children's hands, and each sight was a fresh twist of a knife that had been lodged in his heart for 5 long years. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime. 5 years since he had last seen his daughter Maya, his brilliant, quiet, artistic Maya. The divorce had been a war, a brutal, scorched earth campaign waged by a woman he no longer recognized. He had fought for custody with everything he had, but in the end, she had simply vanished, taking Maya with her, melting into the vast, anonymous landscape of the country. She had left behind nothing but a court order he couldn't enforce and a silence that screamed louder than any argument they had ever had. He had poured millions into the search. Private investigators, digital forensics experts, nationwide alerts. They had chased down hundreds of false leads, followed whispers and rumors that led to dead ends and heartbreak. He had built a global tech empire from nothing, a world of logic and data and predictable outcomes. But he could not solve this one most critical equation. He could not find his own child. The irony was a bitter poison he swallowed every single day. His mentor and the closest thing he had to a father, Arthur, constantly urged him not to give up hope. Arthur was the retired chairman of the board, a man of quiet wisdom and unshakable faith. "Hope is not a strategy, Julian," he would say, his voice a gravelly comfort over the phone. "It is the fuel. Without it, the engine stops." But Julian's fuel was running low. The hope was becoming thin, a ghost of an emotion he could barely remember feeling. In the toy store, seeing that woman's face, the mixture of love and desperation and shame, had struck a chord deep inside him. He recognized that look. It was the look of a parent willing to do anything for their child. For a fleeting moment, her struggle had pulled him out of his own suffocating grief. Paying for the toy was an impulse, a simple act, but it felt like the only meaningful thing he had done all day. He had helped a mother give her child a moment of joy. It was a pale imitation of the joy he longed to give his own daughter, but it was something. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him back to his cold reality. It was a text from his lead investigator, a man named Henderson. "Call me. Urgent." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Urgent could mean anything. It could be another crushing disappointment, or it could be the breakthrough he had almost stopped praying for. He ducked into a quiet alley, away from the noise of the shoppers, and dialed the number, his hand unsteady. "Henderson," he said, his voice tight. "What have you got?" The investigator's voice was low, controlled, but Julian could detect an undercurrent of excitement. "Mr. Vance, we've been running the new facial recognition software against school enrollment databases, cross-referencing with public aid records, as you suggested. We got a hit, a low-probability match, but a match nonetheless." Julian leaned against the cold brick wall, his breath misting in the air. "Where?" he asked, the word barely a whisper. "A public elementary school right here in the city. PS 114, a first grader named Maya. Last name is different, her mother's maiden name, but the photo... Julian, the photo looks like her. Older, of course, but it's her eyes." Julian's world tilted on its axis. He had seen so many photos of so many little girls. He had learned to shield his heart from the inevitable disappointment. "Send it to me," he said, his voice hoarse. "And everything else you have. The school, the teacher, everything." A moment later, his phone chimed with an incoming email. He opened the attachment, his thumb hovering over the file. He took a deep, shuddering breath and tapped the screen. A school enrollment photo appeared. A small girl with large, dark, soulful eyes stared back at him. Her hair was longer, her face a little thinner, but it was her. It was his Maya. The 5 years of waiting, of searching, of despair crashed down on him. He slid down the brick wall, slumping onto the cold, dirty pavement, the tears he had held back for so long finally breaking free. He sat there for how long, he didn't know. The city's sounds faded into a dull roar. His entire focus was on the picture of his daughter. She was alive. She was here in the same city. After the initial wave of relief and grief had passed, a new feeling began to surface. A cold, sharp anger. Anger at his ex-wife for putting their daughter through this, for hiding her away, for stealing 5 years of her life from him. But he pushed it down. That could come later. Right now, only Maya mattered. He scrolled through the rest of the file Henderson had sent. There was the school's address, the principal's name, and the teacher's name, Elara Vance. He froze. The name was a coincidence, a strange, meaningless echo of his own. He read on. Henderson had included a link to the teacher's class webpage, a simple site the school district provided. On it were photos of class projects, a calendar of events, and a section for student spotlights. He clicked on the link, and there, on the front page, was a recent post. "We are so proud of Maya for her incredible artistic talent. Here is her latest masterpiece." Below the text was a scanned image of a drawing. It was a picture of a starship, rendered with a level of detail and life that was astonishing. It was sleek and silver with a bold red logo on its side. It was the Stardust Comet, the exact toy he had just bought for the woman in the store. Julian stared at the screen, his mind struggling to connect the pieces. The drawing was beautiful, vibrant, shaded with a skill that spoke of good tools. Beneath the drawing, in the careful, blocky print of a child, was a signature, Maya. He zoomed in. He recognized the way she made her A, a little flourish he had taught her himself. It was her. It was his daughter, and she had drawn the very toy that now sat in a bag in the hands of a woman named Alara. The coincidence was too great, too specific. He scrolled back to the teacher's name. Alara, it couldn't be. He thought back to the woman at the checkout. Her worn coat, her dark curly hair, the look of profound worry in her eyes. He hadn't seen her face clearly, not really, but the kindness, the quiet dignity she possessed even in her moment of humiliation. Could it be the same person? The teacher who was nurturing his daughter's talent? A sudden, stunning realization washed over him. He thought about the high quality of the drawing. The pencils used were not standard school-issue crayons. They were artist grade. A teacher on a public school salary. Where would she get the money for expensive supplies for one student? And then he remembered the woman's declined card. The $10 price of the toy. A desperate thought, a wild hypothesis began to form in his mind. What if she had used her last cash not for herself, but for her student, for his Maya? What if she had intended to buy her own son's gift? With a credit card that she knew might not work because she had already spent her last dollar on his daughter? The possibility was so immense, so overwhelming that he felt a renewed wave of emotion. But this time, it was not grief. It was awe. It was a profound, soul-shaking gratitude that left him breathless. In a world that had shown him so much cruelty and selfishness, this woman, this stranger, might have performed an act of pure, selfless kindness for his child. He looked down at the photo of Maya on his phone, then at the drawing of the starship. The pieces didn't just connect. They locked into place with the force of destiny. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones what he had to do. He had to find that woman. He had to thank her. And he had to bring his daughter home. The next morning, Alara moved through the school day in a haze of disbelief and gratitude. Leo had been ecstatic when she'd come home with the Stardust Comet, his shrieks of joy echoing in their small apartment, a sound that was worth any price. She had tucked the toy away to be wrapped and placed under their tiny, sparse tree on Christmas Eve. The stranger's kindness had felt like a miracle, a moment of grace in a life that rarely offered it. She had tried to push the memory of her own humiliation aside, focusing instead on the impossible generosity she had been shown. When Maya arrived at school, she was holding the new sketch pad and the tin of pencils close to her chest, like a precious treasure. She didn't say anything, but as she passed Alara's desk, she looked up, and for the first time all year, she offered a small, hesitant smile. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, a tiny flower blooming in the winter of the little girl's sadness. Alara's heart swelled. It had been the right choice. No matter what, it had been the right choice. Later that morning, during free play, while the other children were building with blocks and playing in the dress-up corner, Maya sat at her desk, completely absorbed. She was drawing with the new pencils, her small hand moving with fluid grace across the thick paper. Alara walked over quietly and looked over her shoulder. Maya was drawing a starship, the Stardust Comet from memory, adding her own swirling nebulas and distant planets in the background. The colors were rich and deep, a universe coming to life on the page. "That's beautiful, Maya," Alara said softly, not wanting to startle her. Maya looked up, her dark eyes shining. "It's for my daddy," she whispered, the words so quiet Alara had to lean in to hear them. "He loves stars." It was the most personal thing the child had ever said. Alara's heart ached. She gently squeezed Maya's shoulder. "I'm sure he will love it more than anything." Just before lunch, the principal, a kind but perpetually stressed woman named Mrs. Davis, appeared at her classroom door. Her expression was one of barely contained shock. "Alara," she said, her voice low, "there are some people here to see you, and Maya. They're in my office. They're with her father." Alara's blood ran cold. Maya's father? The emergency contact form listed only a mother. She had never heard a father mentioned. She looked over at Maya, who seemed oblivious, still lost in her drawing. "Her father," Alara repeated, confused. Mrs. Davis nodded, her eyes wide. "And his lawyer." "Alara, it's Julian Vance." The name meant nothing to Alara. She followed Mrs. Davis down the quiet hallway to the main office, her mind reeling. What could this be about? Was Maya in some kind of trouble? Was her mother? The door to the principal's office was ajar. As Mrs. Davis pushed it open, Alara saw him. He was standing by the window, his back to the door, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. When he turned around, Alara's breath caught her chest. It was him. The man from the toy store. His eyes, which had held such a deep and distant sadness the night before, were now fixed on her with an intensity that was startling. They were filled with a raw, powerful emotion she couldn't immediately name. Gratitude, relief, awe. He took a step toward her. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "I believe we met last night." Alara was speechless. The man from the store was Maya's father, the billionaire tech mogul whose face she now vaguely recognized from magazine covers. The pieces were flying at her too fast to assemble. You're Maya's father," she managed to stammer. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I am. I've been looking for her for a very long time." His gaze was unwavering. "And it seems I have you to thank for taking such wonderful care of her, and for this." He gestured to the principal's desk where Maya's drawing of the Stardust Comet was now lying. "My investigator sent me a copy of this last night. It's how I knew for certain that I'd found her." The full weight of the situation crashed down on Alara. This man, this stranger who had paid for her son's toy, had found his long-lost daughter because of a drawing she had made, a drawing inspired by the very toy he had bought. And she had made that drawing with the pencils that Alara had bought, with the money meant for that toy. It was a circle of coincidence so perfect, so profound. It felt like the plot of a fantastic story. The reunion between Julian and Maya was a thing of quiet, heartbreaking beauty. It was handled with immense care by a child psychologist who had accompanied Julian. There were tears, not of sorrow, but of a relief so deep it was almost painful to witness. Julian knelt before his daughter, his large frame trembling, and spoke to her in whispers. He touched her hair as if she were a fragile mirage he was afraid might disappear, and Maya, silent Maya, wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on, her face buried in his shoulder, finally safe. Alara watched from a distance, her own eyes filled with tears. She felt like an intruder on a moment so sacred, yet she was inextricably part of it. Later, after Maya had been gently settled in the office to speak with the psychologist, Julian approached Alara again. The formal reserve was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was deeply human. "The principal told me," he began, his voice low and earnest, "that you often buy supplies for your students, that you use your own money." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "The pencils, the ones Maya used for that drawing, did you buy them for her yesterday?" Alara felt her face flush. She simply nodded, not trusting her voice. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of her answer. "And last night, at the store," he continued, his voice softer still, "your card was declined. You were trying to buy a $10 toy for your son." He didn't need to finish the question. He already knew the answer. The connection was clear in his eyes. "You used your last $10 to buy my daughter art supplies." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, spoken with a reverence that made Alara's heart ache. "She needed them," Alara whispered. "She has such a gift. I just wanted her to have the right tools to speak." Julian looked at her, and in that moment she felt truly seen, not as a struggling single mother or a tired teacher, but as a person whose small act of kindness had changed the world, his world. "You gave my daughter a voice when I wasn't here to listen," he said, his own voice cracking with emotion. "You gave my daughter hope. There is no way I can ever repay you for that, but I have to try." He took a deep breath, composing himself. "Miss Vance, Alara, I have a charitable foundation. We focus on educational and artistic programs for underprivileged children. It's my life's work outside of my company. The director of our new community outreach initiative just retired. The position is open." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not offering you a job because I feel indebted to you. I'm offering it because I have seen firsthand the kind of person you are. Your compassion, your integrity. That's what I want at the very heart of my foundation. I want you to run the program. I want you to take the kindness you show to 20 children every day and help us show it to 20,000. The offer was so staggering, so far beyond the realm of anything Alara had ever imagined for her life, that she couldn't process it. He named a salary that was more than 4 times what she currently earned. He spoke of resources, of the ability to build programs from the ground up, to truly make a difference on a scale she had only dreamed of. It was a life-altering, world-changing opportunity, presented to her in a drab school office on a Tuesday morning. She looked at him, at this man whose life had so impossibly collided with her own. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the deep, abiding gratitude. She thought of Leo, of the constant grinding worry about money, of the life she could give him. She thought of herself, of the chance to use her passion for education without the crippling constraints of a broken system. After a moment of stunned silence, a moment where the entire trajectory of her future shifted, she found her voice, and with a teary, shaky, unbelievable smile, she accepted. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. The transition was handled with a quiet efficiency that was the hallmark of Julian's world. He insisted on a generous severance package for the school to hire a new teacher and provided a grant to the art department that left Mrs. Davis speechless. Alara's new role at the Vance Foundation was everything he had promised, and more. It was challenging, meaningful work that filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known. For the first time in her adult life, the gnawing anxiety about finances was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of security. Her relationship with Julian began on a professional footing. They had meetings about budgets and program proposals. He was her boss, a figure of immense power and influence. But beneath the surface of their work, a different connection was growing, a bond forged in the crucible of that one extraordinary day. It grew in small, quiet moments. He would often offer her a ride home after late meetings, the comfortable silence in his luxury car, a welcome respite from the city's noise. He always asked about Leo, listening with genuine interest to her stories about his latest adventures and discoveries. He began to bring small gifts, not extravagant things, but thoughtful ones. A bag of gourmet coffee beans after she mentioned she was tired, a collection of classic children's books for Leo, a beautiful silk scarf because he'd noticed her old one was frayed. Each gesture was a quiet message. I see you. I appreciate you. He was reserved, still carrying the deep scars of his past. But with her, Alara saw flashes of a warmth and gentleness he seemed to show to no one else. One evening, working late on a proposal, they found themselves sharing stories. The professional wall between them crumbled, brick by brick. Alara spoke of her own past, of being abandoned by Leo's father when she was pregnant, of the lonely, terrifying struggle to build a life for them on her own. She spoke of her fears and her small joys, of the immense, all-consuming love she had for her son. In turn, Julian opened up to her about his own pain. He spoke of his marriage, not with anger, but with a deep, melancholic regret for what it had become. He described the agonizing years of searching for Maya, the crushing weight of helplessness, the feeling that his success was a bitter mockery when the one person who mattered most was missing. He told her how his own childhood had been emotionally sterile, raised by a distant father who valued achievement above all else, leaving him with a deep-seated fear of failing as a parent himself. In sharing their vulnerabilities, they discovered a profound connection. They were two people from vastly different worlds, whose lives had been shaped by loss and a fierce protective love for their children. Their scars were not weaknesses. They were bridges that connected them. Alara saw beyond the billionaire and found a man who was kind, devoted, and deeply wounded. Julian saw beyond the struggling single mother and found a woman of incredible strength, integrity, and boundless compassion. The kindness he showed extended to Leo. He would attend his weekend soccer games, cheering from the sidelines. He helped him build a complex model rocket, patiently explaining the principles of aerodynamics. He treated Leo not as an obligation, but with a natural, fatherly warmth that made Alara's heart ache with a new and unfamiliar emotion. She saw the way Leo looked at him, with a hero worship he had never had a chance to direct at a father of his own, and she, in turn, became a steady, gentle presence for Maya. The little girl was slowly healing, blossoming under the love of her father and the stability of her new life. But she was still quiet, still prone to moments of sadness. Alara would spend time with her, not as a teacher, but as a friend. They would draw together for hours, filling sketchbooks with magical worlds. In Alara's calm, reassuring presence, Maya found a safe space to simply be. Julian watched their interactions with a quiet, profound gratitude. Alara was not just healing his daughter, she was healing him, showing him what a warm, loving family could look like. Their professional relationship had long since melted away, replaced by a deep, unspoken affection that was slowly, inevitably, turning into love. A year passed, the seasons turned, and the city was once again draped in the glittering lights of Christmas. But this year, everything was different. The cold was no longer a threat, but a crisp, festive promise of holidays spent in warmth and comfort. Alara no longer walked the streets with a heart full of anxiety, but with a sense of peace and belonging that she had once believed was impossible. She lived in a beautiful, comfortable home, a place filled with light and laughter. Her work at the foundation was her passion realized, a dream she hadn't even dared to have. On Christmas Eve, the air in their home was filled with the scent of pine from the magnificent tree that stood in the living room and the aroma of baking gingerbread. Leo and Maya, who had become as close as siblings, were decorating cookies in the kitchen, their happy chatter a constant, joyful melody. Alara stood by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, a soft smile on her face. The Stardust Comet, the little toy that had started it all, sat on the mantelpiece, a cherished monument to the miracle that had reshaped their lives. Julian came to stand beside her, his arm wrapping gently around her waist. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the children, his face filled with a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from him. "A year ago," he said softly, his voice full of wonder, "I was a ghost walking through this city. I had nothing, not really." He turned to face her, his hands taking hers. His eyes, once so full of sorrow, were now clear and bright and filled with an unmistakable love. "You, Alara," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Leo, you brought the color back into my world. That day in the store, I saw in you a goodness I had stopped believing existed. Your selflessness, your quiet strength. You were willing to sacrifice your own child's happiness for a lonely little girl you barely knew, a little girl who turned out to be my daughter." He shook his head, still in awe of the sheer serendipity of it all. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Alara's breath caught in her throat. He knelt down on one knee, there in the warm glow of the fire and the Christmas tree lights. His gaze never left hers. "You taught me that the greatest wealth isn't in a bank account, but in the love you give away. Alara Vance, you are the kindest, strongest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. You healed my daughter, you healed me, and you've made my life whole. Will you marry me? Will you let us be a family, officially?" Tears streamed down Alara's face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The past year had been a fairy tale, and this was the impossible, perfect conclusion. She looked from his earnest, loving face to the two children in the kitchen, her son and his daughter, their family already woven together by love and fate. There was only one possible answer. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant diamond that shone with the light of 1,000 promises. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness and passion that sealed their future. The final scene of their story was not an ending, but a beginning. It was a picture of a family forged not by blood, but by a single act of kindness that had rippled outward, creating a wave of love and healing that had saved them all. They stood together, the four of them, in their warm, bright home, surrounded by the magic of Christmas, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound miracles begin with the smallest of sacrifices, in the most unexpected of places. The lonely little girl had found her father, the struggling mother had found her home, the lost man had found his heart, and the little boy had a family to make his starship fly.